Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at the fascinating world of cyber attacks. And
Hmm.
we're using the Wikipedia article, List of Cyber Attacks.
Yeah.
But before we get into the specifics, let's just define what a cyber attack actually is.
Yeah, definitely. So a cyber attack, it's basically any type of offensive maneuver that's targeting computer systems.
Hmm.
Infrastructures, computer networks, devices, basically anything that can be connected. And the goal is usually to steal, alter, or destroy data by exploiting vulnerabilities in these systems.
So it's kind of like the digital equivalent of breaking and entering,
Exactly.
but with potentially way bigger consequences.
Right.
And this list is pretty extensive.
Right.
It seems like these attacks can range from, small-scale incidents to massive coordinated operations.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The scope and the sophistication of cyber attacks has increased dramatically over the years. I mean, we've seen everything from these indiscriminate attacks that just affect a wide range of targets to highly targeted ones that focus on specific organizations or even individuals.
Yeah, the article mentions a category called indiscriminate attacks.
Right.
Can you explain what that means exactly?
Yeah, so indiscriminate attacks, they basically cast a really wide net,
Okay.
and they can impact governments and companies across the globe. One example of this is Operation Shady, RAT. This was a campaign that went on for a really long time, and it infiltrated tons of organizations all over the world. I mean, governments, businesses, even the UN.
So basically anyone and everyone is a potential target.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, these attacks, they often exploit common vulnerabilities, or they use like these widespread phishing campaigns to get into systems. Another example of an indiscriminate attack is the WannaCry ransomware attack.
Oh yeah, I remember that. That was, what, 2017?
Yeah,
That caused a lot of problems, didn't it? Like hospitals and businesses all over the world were affected.
absolutely. It spread super fast, encrypting data on hundreds of thousands of computers and in over 150 countries. So yeah, it was a big deal. It was a real reminder of how vulnerable our systems are, especially when, people don't really follow basic security practices.
And speaking of vulnerabilities, there's this RED October attack. That sounds more like a spy movie than an actual cyber attack.
I know, right? So RAD October, it was this long-term intelligence gathering operation, and it went undetected for, I think, up to 5 years. The attackers are believed to be from Russia, and they stole a ton of data from diplomatic, government, scientific organizations all over the world.
5 years is a long time to go unnoticed. What kind of data did they manage to steal?
All kinds of stuff. I mean, diplomatic cables, classified documents, they even got personal information from mobile phones
Yeah.
and network equipment. So it was very sophisticated. And it showed how difficult it can be to detect and prevent these advanced persistent threats. They call them APTs.
Okay, so these indiscriminate attacks are pretty scary,
Hmm.
but at least they're not deliberately trying to destroy data, right?
Well, unfortunately, some attacks are aimed at causing damage. And those are what we call destructive attacks.
Okay.
They tend to be more targeted, focused on disrupting or disabling specific organizations or systems. The scale can really vary, though.
Okay, in what way?
Well, you've got things like the Great Hacker War back in 1998 that involved a bunch of attacks and counterattacks between different hacker groups. Websites and systems all over the world were affected.
Right.
Then you have things like, on a much smaller scale, the Lulzraft Group, and they attacked a Canadian web hosting provider. Their goal was basically to disrupt services and just cause chaos. It wasn't really about stealing data or making money.
So like the difference between a global conflict and just like a localized skirmish.
Exactly.
Were there any destructive attacks that were particularly, memorable?
Oh, yeah, definitely. One that comes to mind is the Shamoon virus attack on Saudi Aramco. Back in 2012, that attack wiped data from something like over 30,000 workstations. And that really disrupted the company's operations for weeks. Another example is the Wiper malware attack, which just completely erased data from systems at the oil ministry in an unnamed Middle Eastern country. So that likely caused significant damage and disruption.
It's interesting how some of these attacks target critical infrastructure and services. Is that becoming more common?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, disrupting critical infrastructure can have a huge impact on a country's economy, public safety, national security. Then you have things like Stuxnet, which was kind of a hybrid. It blurred the lines between a cyber attack and physical sabotage.
Stuxnet. Wasn't that the one that targeted Iran's nuclear program?
Yeah. It's widely believed to have been a joint U.S.-Israeli operation, and it targeted Iran's uranium enrichment facilities. It was a very sophisticated worm. It got into the control systems of their centrifuges and caused them to malfunction and spin out of control.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't just about stealing data. They actually wanted to physically damage the equipment.
So that takes cyber warfare to a whole new level.
Right. It's often seen as a turning point in cyber warfare history. It really showed the potential for cyber attacks to cause damage and disruption on a huge scale. And speaking of cyber warfare, that's a whole other category of attacks that we need to talk about. These are politically motivated attacks. Espionage sabotage is usually the goal. One of the earliest and most famous examples was the cyber attacks on Estonia back in 2007.
Estonia. What happened there?
So Estonia was one of the first countries to experience a large-scale cyber attack on their national infrastructure. Government websites, banks, media outlets, they were all bombarded with traffic, basically shutting them down. It's widely believed that Russia was behind it, although they never officially took responsibility. But what was really interesting about this attack was that it was a wake-up call for many countries. It really showed how vulnerable critical infrastructure is to these kinds of attacks, and it highlighted how cyber warfare can disrupt a nation's economy and their social fabric.
So it's kind of a pivotal moment in the evolution of cyber warfare.
Absolutely. It shifted people's perception of cyber attacks from being just a nuisance to being an actual threat to national security. And then just a year later, during the Russo-Georgian War, we saw the first documented use of cyber attacks combined with traditional military operations.
Oh, wow. So like a two-pronged attack
Yeah,
with physical and digital warfare happening at the same time.
exactly. The attacks targeted the Georgian government websites and their communication networks, which basically disrupted their defenses and their ability to communicate with the outside world. And this showed how cyber warfare could be used alongside traditional tactics to achieve a strategic objective.
It's a chilling reminder of how warfare is evolving in the digital age. Are there any other examples of cyber warfare that stand out?
Yeah, so there were some suspected Chinese cyber attacks on the Canadian government back in 2011.
Yeah.
That resulted in the theft of classified data from various government departments. And the Canadian government's response was actually to cut off internet access to those departments to stop any further data breaches.
Wow, that's drastic.
It is. But it shows how seriously governments are taking these threats.
Yeah.
And as these attacks get more sophisticated and the stakes get higher, we can expect to see even more aggressive responses from governments all over the world.
Yeah, it makes sense. So far, we've talked about attacks that are indiscriminate, destructive, and those that are part of some broader cyber warfare strategy. Are there other types of attacks that we should know about?
Yeah, for sure. The Wikipedia article goes on to list several other categories. You've got things like government espionage, corporate espionage, and attacks that target specific types of data like financial information, medical records.
Government espionage sounds like something out of a spy novel.
Yeah, it does, but it's more common than you might think. Governments all over the world, they engage in cyber espionage to gather intelligence, steal secrets, and get ahead of their rivals.
Like what, for example?
A really big example is the Office of Personnel Management data breach. Back in 2014, hackers who were believed to be working for the Chinese government, they stole the personal data of millions of U.S. government employees. And that included background check information, security clearance details.
Wow.
It was a big intelligence win for them, and it raised a lot of concerns about the security of sensitive government data.
That's pretty disturbing. I mean, if governments are vulnerable to these attacks, what hope do the rest of us have?
Yeah, it's a valid concern. And it's not just governments that are being targeted. You also see a lot of corporate espionage where companies try to steal trade secrets, intellectual property of other valuable data from their competitors.
It's like industrial espionage, but in the digital world.
Exactly. One big example is the Operation Aurora attack in 2009. That was a very sophisticated campaign, allegedly carried out by hackers connected to the Chinese government. And they targeted a bunch of major U.S. companies, including Google.
Google,
Like-
wait, they got hacked. I thought they were supposed to be the kings of cybersecurity.
Well, even the most advanced companies can be vulnerable to really determined and well-funded attackers.
Yeah.
In this case, the hackers were after intellectual property source code and other sensitive data that could give them a competitive advantage.
So it seems like nowhere is really safe in the digital world.
Yeah, it can feel like that.
Is there anything individuals and companies can do to protect themselves from this?
There are definitely steps you can take to reduce the risk. But before we get into that, let's explore some of these other categories of attacks mentioned in this list.
Okay, sounds good. What's next on the list?
Well, there's stolen email addresses and login credentials. That's a problem that affects pretty much everyone who uses the internet.
Yeah.
These attacks usually target big databases of user information, or they exploit vulnerabilities in websites and online services.
So this is how those massive data breaches happen.
Yeah.
where millions of usernames and passwords are leaked.
Exactly. One of the earliest and biggest examples of this was the RockU data breach back in 2009. Hackers stole over 32 million user accounts from a popular social gaming website. It was a big wake-up call. It showed how important it is to have strong, unique passwords and to avoid using the same password for multiple accounts.
It's scary how easily that information can be compromised online.
It is. And as we rely more and more on these online services,
Yeah,
for everything, banking, shopping, social
Yeah.
networking, the potential consequences of these data breaches just become more severe.
right. Speaking of sensitive data,
Yeah,
what about stolen credit card and financial information? That's definitely one of my biggest fears.
I understand. Attacks that target financial data are getting more common and way more sophisticated,
Yeah.
and they can have a devastating impact on individuals and businesses.
So what are some of the biggest examples of these attacks?
Well, the Equifax data breach in 2017, that was a huge wake-up call for a lot of people. It exposed the personal data of 145.5 million U.S. consumers, and that included social security numbers, birth dates, addresses, credit card information.
Yeah, I remember that one. I think that was one of the biggest data breaches ever.
It was, and it really showed just how vulnerable even big, well-established companies can be.
Hmm.
And the consequences of cybersecurity failures. And then you have the Home Depot breach in 2014, where hackers got info from 56 million payment cards.
It's like a constant battle. You think you're safe, and then something new pops up.
Yeah, it can feel that way. And as we move towards a more digital world with more online transactions and digital currencies, these attacks are only going to become more frequent and more sophisticated.
You mentioned digital currencies.
Yeah.
Are those also targets for cyber attacks?
Absolutely. Cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum, their value has skyrocketed.
Right?
And that's made them really attractive targets for hackers.
Okay.
The blockchain technology that underlies most cryptocurrencies is designed to be secure,
Right.
but it's not completely foolproof.
I thought the blockchain was supposed to be unhackable.
Well, the blockchain itself is very secure, but the platforms and exchanges that people use to trade cryptocurrencies,
Yeah.
those are often vulnerable. For example, in 2014, the Mt. Gox exchange, which was once the biggest Bitcoin exchange in the world, it collapsed after hackers stole hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins.
So even though the blockchain itself might be secure, the systems built around it can still be compromised.
Exactly. And then there's the DAO fork in 2016. Hackers exploited a vulnerability in a decentralized autonomous organization, and they siphoned off $50 million worth of Ether.
Wow. So even this cutting-edge technology isn't immune.
No, unfortunately not. Like any new technology, there's a learning curve.
Right.
And developers and users, they need to be careful about identifying and addressing vulnerabilities.
So it's like a never-ending game of cat and mouse between the hackers and the cybersecurity experts.
Pretty much. And the stakes just keep getting higher as we become more reliant on these
Yes.
technologies.
Before we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, there's one more category of attacks I want to touch on.
Okay.
Those targeting medical-related data.
Yeah, that's a relatively new and pretty concerning category of attack. Medical records contain a lot of really sensitive personal information, and if that data is stolen, it can have really serious consequences for individuals.
So what are some examples of these attacks?
Well, in 2015, the health insurance company Anthem, they had a big data breach,
Right.
exposing the personal information of over 78 million people. And that incident really highlighted how vulnerable healthcare organizations are to cyber attacks and the potential harm to individuals if their data is compromised.
Yeah, that's scary. Imagine all your medical records, your personal health information out there in the wrong hands.
It's not a good thought. And it's not just big companies that are targeted. Back in 2022, the International Committee of the Red Cross, they were targeted. And the attack compromised sensitive data on over 515,000 vulnerable people.
Wow.
And that attack was especially concerning because it showed that even organizations that are dedicated to humanitarian aid, they're not immune to these threats.
It's a sobering reminder that cyber attacks can affect everyone. Individuals, businesses, critical institutions, even humanitarian efforts.
Exactly. And as we go through this list of cyber attacks, we'll see just how diverse and impactful these incidents can be.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot more ground to cover.
Yeah, we do. The world of cyber attacks is huge and complex, and this list is really just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, before we get too deep into that iceberg, let's take a quick pause. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive into the world of cyber attacks. We'll be looking at the evolution of these threats, the reasons behind them, and what we can do to protect ourselves in this increasingly digital world.
Definitely stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into cyber attacks. Before the break, we were talking about those government and corporate espionage cases. I mean, it seems like no one is safe, not even humanitarian organizations.
Yeah, that's true. The digital landscape is a battlefield, and it's constantly changing. The motives behind these attacks are as varied as the methods.
Speaking of motives, the article mentions hacktivism.
Right.
What exactly is that?
So hacktivism, it's using hacking techniques to promote a cause, like a political or social cause. It's like digital activism. It can be anything from defacing a website to launching DDoS attacks, where they flood a website with traffic to make it crash. Or they could leak confidential information or disrupt online services.
So it's like protesting, but in cyberspace.
Yeah, kind of.
Are there any famous hacktivist groups or actions?
Oh, yeah, tons. Anonymous, for example. It's this international group of hacktivists, and they've been involved in a bunch of high-profile operations. They usually target governments and corporations they see as corrupt or oppressive. They've attacked everything from government websites to financial institutions.
So hacktivism can be a powerful tool for change.
Yeah.
But it also raises some ethical questions, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
is it ever okay to break the law or disrupt services for a cause?
That's a tough one. There's no easy answer. It's a really complex debate. The line between ethical activism and criminal activity can be blurry. It depends on the context and the cause.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But let's get back to the practical stuff. I mean, with all these cyber attacks happening, what can people and organizations do to protect themselves?
That's the big question, isn't it? There's no magic bullet that will guarantee 100% protection. But there are steps you can take to lower the risk.
Okay, so let's hear them. What can we do?
Well, first of all, you need to be aware. Understand the threats, how they work, and what could happen if an attack is successful. Knowledge is power, right?
The education is key.
Right. And then you need to practice good cybersecurity hygiene. That means having basic security habits that can really reduce your risk.
Okay, like what?
Strong, unique passwords
Mhm.
for every single online account.
Got it. No more using the same password for everything.
Exactly. And don't use those easy passwords, like password 123 or your pet's name.
Okay.
Use two-factor authentication whenever you can. It adds an extra layer of security. You need a code from your phone or email to log in.
So it's like double locking your digital door.
Exactly. And don't ignore those software updates. They often have patches that fix vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, those updates. Always popping up at the worst time.
I know, but they're important.
Okay.
And be careful about what you click on and download. Phishing emails and malicious links, they're a very common way for attackers to get into your systems.
So if I get an email from a Nigerian prince offering me $1 million, I should probably just delete it.
Probably, yeah. Just be wary of any emails that ask you to click links or download attachments, especially if they seem too good to be true.
Good advice. What else?
Back up your data regularly. That way, if you do get hit with a ransomware attack or you lose your data, you'll have a recent backup.
Okay, great tips. But what about the bigger picture? What are governments and organizations doing to combat these threats on a global level?
They're working on multiple fronts. They're trying to improve information sharing, develop strategies for cooperation, and invest in research and development, basically trying to stay ahead of the game.
That's a lot to tackle.
It is. Cyber attacks are always changing, so it's an ongoing battle.
Yeah.
One really interesting development is using artificial intelligence in cybersecurity.
Oh, AI. How does that work?
So these AI algorithms, they can analyze huge amounts of data. They look for patterns that could indicate an attack. They can even automate threat detection and response. It's like having a 247 digital security guard watching over your systems.
So we've got a digital watchdog now.
Mm.
But couldn't hackers also use AI for their own evil purposes?
Yeah, that's the problem. It's a double-edged sword. Hackers are already trying to use AI to make their attacks more sophisticated. They're developing better malware, and they're even automating phishing campaigns.
Well, it's an AI arms race.
It kind of is. That's why we need to be ahead of the curve. We need to develop ethical guidelines for AI and cybersecurity. We want to make sure that this powerful technology is used responsibly.
Makes sense. We've talked about the threats and the defenses, but what do you think is the biggest cybersecurity challenge right now?
That's a hard one. There are so many threats, and they're always changing. But I'd say one of the biggest challenges is the human element.
What do you mean by that?
Well, a lot of attacks rely on human error. They use social engineering tactics. Basically, they trick people into giving up information or giving them access to their systems,
Okay.
like phishing emails. They might pretend to be a legitimate organization to steal your login credentials,
Right.
or those social media scams that take advantage of people's trust.
So even with all this technology, we're still our own worst enemy.
Yeah, often, yeah. That's why education and awareness are so important. We need to teach people how to spot these threats and understand the role they play in cybersecurity.
So it's a collective effort. We can't just rely on technology to protect us.
Exactly. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. Individuals, organizations, governments, we all need to work together to create a safer digital environment.
Okay, so we've covered a lot in this deep dive. The history of cyber attacks, the different types of threats, the motivations, and how to protect ourselves. What's next?
Well, now we look ahead. The future of cybersecurity. The trends that will shape the digital landscape in the years to come. The challenges and the opportunities. That's where things get really interesting.
Okay, so we're back, and we're ready to talk about the future of cybersecurity. You said it was about to get really interesting. So what trends should we be watching out for?
Well, one that's already making a big impact is the Internet of Things, the IoT.
Right. Smart fridges, talking toasters, all that. But how does that affect cybersecurity?
It's not just about smart homes. It's a whole network of devices. Sensors, medical devices, cars, even entire cities. As more things get connected, the attack surface grows. Every connected device is a potential entry point for hackers.
So it's not just data anymore. It's physical devices and systems. That could have real-world consequences.
Exactly. Think about someone hacking a self-driving car or disrupting a city's power grid. It could be chaos.
Okay, that's a
Like
bit
a-
scary. So how do we secure all these devices?
That's the challenge. We need to do a few things. Manufacturers need to build security in from the start. Make updates easy. Consumers need to understand the risks. Secure their whole networks. Use strong passwords. Enable two-factor authentication. And we need good regulations and standards to ensure a basic level of security for everyone.
Sounds complicated.
It is.
What other trends are important?
Quantum computing. That's a big one.
Isn't that still mostly theoretical?
It's becoming reality, and it could change everything about cybersecurity, for better or worse.
How so?
Well, quantum computers are incredibly powerful. They can do calculations way faster than regular computers. This could be great for cybersecurity. We could create much stronger encryption and analyze threats better.
So it's like a super brain on our side.
Yeah, kinda, but here's the catch. Quantum computers could also break our current encryption methods. A powerful enough quantum computer could crack a lot of the codes we use today.
So all our online banking could be vulnerable.
That's the worry. That's why people are working on quantum-resistant encryption. We have to stay ahead of the game.
So quantum computing is a bit of a double-edged sword.
Definitely.
Exciting, but also kind of scary.
Right.
What other challenges are out there?
Artificial intelligence, AI. It's a tool. It can be used for good or bad. And as AI gets more advanced, we're going to see more advanced cyber attacks. AI-powered malware. It can be really hard to detect. And it could adapt to our defenses.
Like a digital arms race with AI as the weapon.
It's kind of like that, yeah.
Yeah.
But AI can also help us. We can use it to build smarter defenses, automate threat detection, maybe even predict attacks before they happen.
It sounds like cybersecurity is about to change in a big way.
It is. There are challenges and opportunities, and we need to work together to adapt to this changing landscape.
Okay, so we talked about a lot today. The history, the threats, the motivations, the defenses. What's the main thing you want people to remember?
Cybersecurity is not just about technology. It's about people. People making decisions, taking actions that can either make things more secure or less secure. We need to be aware of the risks, understand the threats, and make smart choices to protect ourselves, our data, and our digital lives.
Well said. And to our listeners out there, the next time you click a link, open an attachment, or connect to a public Wi-Fi network, think before you act. Your digital security is in your hands.
That's right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of cyber attacks. We hope you learned something. Stay safe out there.
Until next time.